Hello all. Today we will study the chapter 6, lecture 5. In these lectures, we will study the time value of money. We will have the three parts for these lectures. The first one is called multiple uneven cash flows. And in the last lectures, we studied the single cash flows, present value and future values. Now we have the multiple cash flows which will happen on different times. Next one we will study a special case for the equal cash flows, and it will repeat for multiple periods. They have a special name called annuity and perpetuities. Last one we will study comparing rates. The first part for lecture 5 is multiple uneven cash flows. We will try to solve the future and the present values. Let's take a short review for last lectures. In the previous chapter, we used the single cash flow and moved the cash flows forward and backward in times. When we start from the present values and move forward to the future values, we call this one as a compounding process. If we have the future values in our hand, we try to go backward to solve the present values. This process is called discounting. So compounding and discounting help us to connecting between the present value and future values. Use the interest rate. And in the realities, we may have more than one cash flows on a single time point, and this one called multiple cash flows. The concept and formulas are identical if we adding the single cash flows on different times together. So we cheat, these multiple cash flows into the individual cash flows on different time and adding them up. Let's look at some questions. Suppose you have $1,000 now in a savings account, and this account earns 6% interest rate. You want to add $500 1 year from now and $700 2 years from now. How much will you have 2 years from now in your savings account? You can see on these timelines. Today we have a $1,000 deposit. In the next year, additional $500 will be added into this account. Then again, on the second years, another $700 into this account. So how much in total after 2 years in this saving account will be these questions ask you to solve. So there are 3 cash flows and on different time point. So this one called multiple cash flows. We can simply separate each cash flows on individual times and do the calculations of a compounding independently. Then after you solve the future values for these 3 cash flows, you will add them up backwards. So this one can help you to solve the multiple cash flows future values. And we can do simple calculations in use your financial calculators, right? So for example, 1000 is the PV. There are 2 years, so 1000 into the PV, 2 into the N. Interest rate, is given in the questions at 6%. So 6 into the IY, you solve the future value, you solve the PFV. So this one will give you what? 1124. And this one will be 1 as N, 6 as IY, and 500 as PV. You solve the future values. These calculations will give you 530. 700 exactly on the second year. Will be no more interest will be added. So you add these three numbers up, you got this number 2354 as the multiple cash flows future value. We can do these calculations on our financial calculators using our cash flow key, right? And you can use our individual cash flow for the $1,000 to check this calculation process. So I will not go through this one in detail. You can try this one by yourself. Okay, now let's do something more. Suppose we not stop the deposit. We will keep our money in this account for another what? For another 3 years. So 2 plus 3 will be 5. Means our account will be total in 5 years. So what's your further deposit will be in this account on the time 5? There are actually two ways to solve these questions. The first way, you will use something you solved in the last questions as the future value on time 2, then continue to compounding for the next 3 years. So this one will become something deposit earlier, right? So it's a few present values. And it will continue to deposit for next 3 years, right? 5 minus 2 will be 3. So 3 will be N, and the interest rate will be 6%, 6 IY. You will solve the future values. On your screen, it will be generate $28.03. So the first way actually is based on what you have solved in the first questions. You will move forward for the next 3 years. The next way to solve these questions will be actually started from the very beginning. We ignore the 3 years, right? We're just starting from time 0. And 1,000 now will be compounding forward for 5 years. 500 is for the 4 years. 700 as what? 3 years. So this is the PV. And T as what? T as 5. So 5 as N. 6 as IY. Solve the future value. This one will be 4. Right? Solve the future value. And this one will be 3. Solve the future value. You may write this number down as these numbers on your papers and then add them up. Use your calculator. The total will be as the same numbers as you did in the first way as 2803. That's the future value on time 5 for these 3 multiple cash flow. All these questions we have done is for the future values for the multiple cash flow. For the present values will be the same. You will compute the present values for each cash flows in the multiple cash flows. Then we will also adding these cash flows in the present value together. Consider you receiving the following 4 cash flows. You have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 years, and these cash flows are based on these numbers. Suppose discount rate is 12%. What will this cash flow be worth today? So that means the present values. You need to bring all these 4 multiple cash flows, use the 12% into time zero. First, let's draw the time cash lines. And we label these cash flows on the time based on their orders. We will basically bring the cash flows discounted into time zero. Use our interest rate. Our interest rate in these questions is 12%. We can do our cash flow calculations either use the formula or use our financial calculators. If you use the financial calculators, like the 800, how can we do the present values? It's easy, right? 800 is the future values. Interest rate is 12%, so 12 as IY, 4 like the N. So you solve what? You solve the present values. And you keep this one on the paper, and you do the next 3 cash flows present values one by one. You got these numbers. And adding all these numbers up, you solve the present values for these 4 cash flows as the PV of these multiple cash flows. So that's nothing new compared with the last lectures. For the multiple cash flows, we just do something, more tedious. We separate them into the different time and solve the discounted or compounding values independently. Afterwards, we adding them up will be the total present values or future values. I also write down the details on these slides for the present values of these multiple cash flows in the 4 cash flows one by one. You can follow my calculations to double check the numbers. Be careful of the sign conventions. We know the future value is positive. So on your calculators, when you output the present values, it should be negative. Right? Negative means the cash flows is outflows. Future values inflow, so accordingly, present value will be outflows. They always in a different sign. You can also try the question 2 by yourself, and I put the calculations below the slides. Use the formula, and on the slides I use the financial calculator. So both ways you can get the same answer. I will not go to detail for these questions. Let's try this one by yourself. Now let's take some study for the financial calculators. For our new methods, use the multiple cash flow. There's a special key on calculators called the CF key, called cash flow key. This cash flow key is designed specifically for our multiple cash flows. Instead, we use the present value and the future value. This cash flow key, you can input multiple uneven or even cash flows to solve the present values simultaneously. It's very convenient. We can see the step here one by one. Please check the steps by yourself. We will use our examples below to show how to use the financial calculator to derive the multiple cash flows present values at one time. Be careful, before you do any calculations, we must to clear the memories in the time value of money. You should always do this one before you start to do any calculations on the financial calculators. You need to first press the second clear time value of money, then press clear the work. By doing this step, you actually make sure your memory will be cleared. There's no previous storage in your memory. It will not confuse your calculations afterwards. It's a very important step. Now let's look at questions. Your broker calls you and tells you he has these investment opportunities. If you invest $100 today, you will receive $48 in 1 year, $75 in 2 years. If you require 15% return on investment of this risk, should you take this investment? So these questions ask you to make decisions between the two choices. One choice is you keep your $100 and leave this way aside. Another choice, you can receive the two cash flows. One is 40 in 1 year, the other is 75 in 2 years. So these two choices, which one is better based on the 15% interest rate? As you know, the money has a time values. What you receive in the future will be different from what you receive now. So even 40 plus 75 is more than 100. But don't forget about this compounding interest rate. That's why we need to solve the PV of these two cash flows. Use 15%. Then you can compare with 100. If not, you cannot do the comparison directly. Okay, let's do the steps as we mentioned on the previous slides. Like I mentioned, you need to clear the memory. Right? Press the second, clear the time value of money, then clear the work. After you do this step, you will first press the save key. Save key is on the top lens of your financial calculators. That means you start to do the multiple cash flow input. CF0 means equal to 0, means on the time 0, you have no what? You have no cash flows. We can do the visualize of these two cash flows here, right? On the time 1, you have 40, time 2 has 75. So we basically will discount these two cash flow to time 0. So we will input CF0 equal to 0. CO1 equal to 40. CO2 equal to 75. And FO1 means how many 40. There's only one 40, so FO1 equal to 1. FO2 means there are how many 75? There are only 1 75, so equal to 1. And after you finish the input, make sure you have finished all input. You will press the NPV key. NPV button means you will solve the net present values. You will see the screen will show the I. I means interest rate. In the questions, you see the 15% return. So you will put 15, then press enter. You enter 15 into the memory of I. Then you will tap the what? You will tap the CPT, means computing, solving. You can see the answer, 91.49. What this number means? This number means the present values for these two cash flows on time 0 is 91.49 based on this discounting rate, and this number is less than 100. So if you are smart, if you are rational investors, you know the investment knowledge, you will definitely choose $100, not choose these two. So you will not take these investment opportunities. If you take this one, you will actually take a loss. The loss will be 100 minus 91.49 equal to $8.51. These not are opportunities, but are, bad chance to lose the money for $8.51. And you can open our site. The site will show you step-by-step instruction to do these calculations. And don't forget, for every input, after you put a number, don't forget to press enter. Enter means you write the numbers into memory. If you don't press enter, the value will be still kept as default as 0 or previous inputs. Enter must be tapped before you go to next input. After you finish each input, if you want to go to next, press the down arrow key, means you go to next input. And please try the quick quiz questions at home. I also put some instructions below the slide. You can follow these instructions to practice the multiple cash flows at home. So let's follow multiple uneven cash flows, and you can use the CF key on your financial calculators to do the calculations for these problems. On our course website, we have tutorials, videos from YouTube show you the examples and step-by-step instructions to do the multiple cash flow calculations. Don't forget to check these videos. They are very helpful, and hope you can study something useful from these videos. We also have the homework for this part. If you have any questions, please go back to check our tutorials on the YouTube video and also today's lecture notes to follow the step to do the cash flow calculations.